images into a PowerPoint here. Hopefully I can advance through them. There's a display right now at Fort Nisqually on John McLeod, and that's one of the reasons the women I referred to earlier came down from Canada. It had it's kind of been announced broadly to descendants of John McLeod, and I managed to get some addresses for these women in Canada. I had had some contacts with one of them by Granis, who lives on Vancouver Island here in Bowser, British Columbia. And so that's kind of one thing that's going on now. It's kind of reinvigorated my interest in John McLeod. There's been a couple articles on John McLeod written that have appeared in the Columbia, which Rob showed earlier. A Crofter's Tale by Steve Anderson, which is about John McLeod by his lonesome. And then a story that myself and Annabelle Mounts Barnett wrote about Catherine McLeod Mounts, which then has a lot about John in the course of things there. But John was born in 1815 in Garranan on the Isle of Lewis in the Northern Hebrides of Scotland. He, at about age 22, was involved in making whiskey, had a still, and somebody came in who they thought was an excise man, a tax man, and was there to get some money from him. So a fight broke out, and somehow John McLeod was implicated in throwing this guy into the fire, and thought the man would die, and decided he needed to get the heck out of town. So he headed for the Orkneys, where the Hudson Bay Company hired on people, and he signed a contract to spend 5 years working for the Hudson's Bay Company. I don't. Yeah,
They're available at the archives.
I think Steve Anderson did get it.
So what year was that?
That would have been 1837.
Oh, okay, because John McPhail came in 1832. So
Really? Because I thought John and John and this John were together, but
No.
Okay. Let's see.
Is he gonna advance? Otherwise I can,
Okay, maybe I don't know which button to push. Should it just be the arrow button?
should be. If not, I'll just hit it. There you go.
Oops, it worked. Okay, so the Prince Rupert IV was the steamship that carried John from the Orkneys to York Factory on Hudson's Bay.
I didn't realize it was Steve.
I don't think it's working. I'll have to
Okay,
advance.
go ahead and advance to the next one. Through the North Atlantic, which stories have come down, was pretty stormy on that trip, and pretty rough ride, but he made it to Yorktown, or York Factory, sorry. Go ahead and advance. And joined up with the Hudson Bay Company annual, what they call the annual brigade, to march across, hike across North America, which they had some tough times, some tough winters, supposedly killed some buffalo and managed to survive the winter, did some trapping. The real highlight that has survived the stories of the trip was the disaster at the Dalles du Mort, the Rapids of the Dead, near present-day Revelstoke in British Columbia, where they had two overloaded big canoes that the first one made it through the rapids, but the second one capsized, and 12 people at least died, including a botanist and his newlywed wife. Two Catholic priests, Modeste Demers and Father Blanchette, were part of this group, and some of what's known about the trip is from their writings after they got back, or arrived in the Pacific Northwest. Yeah, and so John, he made it, he survived, he got all the way down the Columbia River. He had actually clung to an overturned canoe and floated supposedly several miles down to the shallows of Arrow Lake, where he got out. And I guess Andre Chalapou was the other one clinging to this canoe and floating down. They heard something, and supposedly a baby that had been stowed between the thwarts or something with all the other luggage had been trapped in the air under this capsized canoe and survived, and so they heard the sound and got this baby out. In fact, I think it might have been Chalapou's own child.
And one of his 3 kids survived.
Survived.
2 didn't, along with his wife.
Okay. So John makes it to Puget Sound to basically Fort Nisqually at the mouth of Sequatchie Creek, and is assigned to the steamship Beaver, which he proceeds to spend at least 5 years primarily as a stoker. He's kind of, he's kind of at the bottom of the echelon, the class system of the Hudson's Bay Company. He's a laborer. I'm not sure he was that loyal to the company based on a number of things. So if you want to kind of force me to leave this group because he was so bad, I could understand. He worked on the Beaver for all these years, cutting cordwood. I think he describes it as like 30 cords of wood required to go from Sequatchie Creek to Victoria, which was the run they made frequently. He basically abandoned the Hudson Bay Company in 1849 when he heard about all the gold in California, abandoned his post. That was only one of the things he did to kind of make the company hierarchy mad at him. Next one, he had married a daughter of Skadewa. Supposedly Skadewa's youngest daughter, through Skadewa's marriage to a Nisqually Indian woman who I think went by Hadawa? Hadawa. And so this daughter had been born on the same, maybe was born very close to the same trading trip where Skadewa was killed and beheaded, and there's various stories that are kind of gruesome about that in 1828. But in any case, this young daughter who lost her father ended up kind of growing up around, I think, Fort Nisqually and maybe being, anyway, John McLeod ended up offering marriage to her family, marrying her, having Catherine in the year 1845, about the same time that first American settling party, the Simmons Party, arrived in Tumwater. And so Catherine was just a little girl when her dad ran off to California to search for gold. There was rumors came back that John McLeod had died in the gold fields of California, and they married off his wife, Cleco, to a Hung Tulips Indian man. So when John McLeod came back, not dead, he found that his wife was no longer around. Took another Indian wife, Hula, or something like that, and had 2 sons, Edwin and John Jr. He had filed for citizenship to be a U.S. citizen on his way to California, stopping at Portland, where apparently they did such things. And on his return was granted citizenship, took out this donation land claim right here, just south of us, which was on Hudson's Bay Company ground, basically. So the company had to send him all kinds of messages about, get off our property, cease and desist what you're trying to do here, which he paid no attention to and got away with, apparently, and got his donation claim. And he had this little cabin, which I think this is some of the family members. John Morgan Mounts is in the middle in this picture. He actually lived on the McLeod property for quite some time after John McLeod died. Next image. So this is Catherine, his first child, and with her first two children, Christina, my great-grandmother, and John Morgan Mounts.
Oh,
Who found that?
So this picture had disappeared long ago, and fortunately Bud McBride knew Jack Cartwright, who's in the trade where he sells Indian baskets, Indian arts, antiquities of various kinds, primarily related to Native Americans. And some other trader in antiquities had found that there was some old tin type in a really fancy hinged box being sold, and it was purported to have come from a Nisqually Indian family. And so he got a look at it and he said, well, I know this has got to be the Mounts family. And he contacted Jack Cartwright, who knew Bud McBride really well, and they said, yeah, that's that's amazing, that's an amazing piece, it's really important to the family. They bought it and basically got it back to Bud McBride, and then Bud immediately called me, and I went down and looked at it, and I was so impressed that this had survived and that it had gotten back to the family. Anyway, it's just a beautiful piece. So, Catherine had a large family with her husband, Dan Mounts. I think let's go to the next one. So that's Dan Mounts on the right. His first claim was on Dickinson Point at the mouth of Henderson Inlet. He then moved to better farming land. I'd love it if the Dickinson Point land had gone down through the family to me, because it's all wonderful waterfront right on Beaver Castle. Great place for a home, but instead he wanted to go someplace where he could grow some beans and corn, and so he settled down in Nisqually. He was appointed Indian agent overseeing the Nisquallies and did that for quite some time. So he was a federal employee trying to get Nisqually Indians to learn how to grow crops, apparently, and do things that maybe their culture really hadn't centered around until they were told they had to live a different lifestyle. Next one. So the Mounts family, let's see, Catherine and Dan had 9 or 10 children. So sometimes the gatherings like this one, Mother's Day, this Mother's Day's gathering, quite large. Here's Catherine, that's my Aunt Ruby McCallister. That's my dad, my Uncle Jim. Annabelle's one of these girls here. Anyway, big family. Next image.
Wow.
This is pretty much Mounts, McLeod, McCallisters, Aunt Ruby again, my great-grandma Christina. This is John McLeod as an old man. Dan Mounts, Frank Mounts, Catherine over there. Next one.
Good-looking bunch. No, didn't smile much.
It seemed like everybody back then was told to just look stern.
Yeah, I think so.
So, you know, John McLeod had this second Indian wife, had Edwin and John Jr. Edwin married a woman named Elizabeth. I don't have any idea what her last name might have been. I'm not sure surnames mattered that much to the Native Americans. After Edwin died in 1898, she married John LeClaire. I think there's a lot of LeClaires maybe in the Skokomish tribe.
Yes.
Yes.
John Jr., he's the one whose descendants are up there in Canada, who I talked about, that came down last weekend. Yeah, next slide. He had 3 daughters, Jessie McLeod, this is Jessie, let's see, who with her husband Francis Andrews. There's a lot of Andrews in the Puyallup Indian tribe. Next one, Agnes, next youngest daughter. I have been unable to get in contact with any of Agnes's descendants. Then Matilda. Matilda is the one who married George Hardy, went to British Columbia. George Hardy was a First Nations British Columbia Indian, and yeah, next slide. And so she had a bunch of Hardy children. When George Hardy died, she married a guy named Johnny Chungranis, who was a cook in a fishing village, Deep Bay, I think, on Vancouver Island. And by Chungranis, Violet was their only child. She's still up there, wonderful woman. Next slide. And John McLeod is an older man. He died in 1905.
Is that his scar in his forehead there? Can you see it?
Yeah, so he also married a woman named Emma Kedge, who she had a reputation for marrying all the old settlers in the region briefly. And I think their marriage might have lasted a few months or something like that. And that would have been in like 1865 or so. And not long after, so there's a notice in the newspaper that says, you know, Emma Kedge has left my bed and I will not be held responsible for any charges she accrues or this and that. And they got a divorce, and it wasn't too long thereafter that some kind of big fracas broke out just outside of Steilacoom, and a guy named Jim Riley just beat John McLeod to mush. His face was basically just beat to mush with a rock. And somebody really needs to write a piece on Jim Riley, because
I think
from what
somebody
I've
is researching that right now.
Oh, that'd be great. Looking at frontier justice, all these early pre-statehood court cases, he appears a number of times. I think he might have just been a serious bigot as far as hating Indians, perhaps, and maybe it was John McLeod's marriage to Indian women, who knows, that caused Jim Riley to beat him so badly. Of course, drunkenness was probably part of it too. But Jim also rode out with George McCallister. So George McCallister was James McCallister's son, and when James was killed, supposedly one son-in-law killed Quang, the Fleshey's brother, but then George went on a vendetta to get at other Indians that he believed were implicated in his father's death. An Indian named Tuapiti was said to have been the one who actually pulled the trigger, so George got with Jim Riley, and they went out to the Puyallup Indian Reservation, found Tuapiti, and supposedly were going to serve him a warrant, but instead they said, oh, he tried to run, and they shot him dead. And that's all well documented in the old, what is it, what was the old newspaper?
Pioneer Democrat.
Okay, next image. Just a quick drawing, an old drawing of kind of how his land laid out along Muck Creek. Next
It's just
one.
across the street here.
Just, yeah,
Yeah.
real close. Next one. A couple old pictures that Annabelle Mounts Barnett has of what the old Mounts, or McLeod farm looked like, and some of the old buildings that the Gall family had bought when they bought much of the property.
Now, if you turn on this road here, I think it's 267th, that goes into there. At the very end, there's a gate and there's a house, and you can see the nut trees. He had chestnuts, I think it's chestnuts, or walnuts. It was some kind of a nut tree that's there, and that's where the house stood. It was just in the backyard. The lady, Marianne Rasmussen, pointed out there's a pad area where there's an old well that was capped, and she's found some silverware and stuff in the backyard, so it's obviously because the walnut trees are in that
Is
picture.
that down past Jim Shoefish?
Yeah.
That road, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
So that's where that second house sat.
Just a modern day aerial photo with the outline of that.
You can see that
320.
road in right in the center there.
Oh, this
Yeah,
one?
yeah, right at the end of that, you see the house with a big round tree there, yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's where that second home, we're still looking for where the first one was.
Is that red dot on the upper right, that's about where the first home was, right?
I think Carl Gall estimated that it was somewhere
up
in,
there.
I don't know, one of those two locations. I can't remember. I was really trying to locate it.
It didn't
there,
seem
but
like it was far from that big mossy pile of stones.
So is that 260th going across that way towards the top?
Two-
farther up.
it's-
Yeah.
That one up there?
That's
Yeah,
260.
that's 260, okay, okay.
And the junior high is not in that picture yet.
So we're right across the street now from the upper left corner of that, right?
Oh, yeah, you want me to go back, and want to, oops, sorry. You want to point out where we are currently?
Where are we?
Can you tell?
Let's see.
Yeah.
Where are we at? Are we?
Down, 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 down.
Down, down,
Right
left,
there.
Right there.
across
This
the
is-
street,
This is
Yeah.
the church.
That's where we are now.
the
Okay.
cemetery.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, okay, sure.
Let's see, I just threw in this affidavit. Apparently John McLeod filed an affidavit at the time that all the discussions were going on about where the boundary would be between Canada and the United States, who would get
Because he was on a
Washington
boat.
State.
He was on the Beaver, and they traveled up there, and they had to
Yeah.
identify where the main boat route was.
Yeah, so there's a fair amount of
These are on
this-
Google Docs.
What
Okay.
year was this? 46 was what the.
Yeah, it would have been around 46.
Well, wasn't it finally settled in like it took a long time to find it.
69.
1869. It took
Yeah.
a long time to find the settlement, and I'm not sure the answer. I thought that maybe this was 1860s, and he actually gave us
It
that.
could have been,
but-
yeah, because
And I
the
guess-
court thing finished in 67. Is there a date there?
I mean, he's definitely talking about all of his activities in the 1840s on the Beaver, and particularly how often they would go in through the strait there between Vancouver Island and the Gulf, the whole Gulf of Georgia area. So there was apparently a lot of question about, who should get the San Juan Islands, who should get Vancouver Island.
There's also one of these about the treason trials.
Oh, yeah, that's good
one of these Google Docs.
And
It's good.
this is about, so that was something I didn't mention is, you know, when Indian War broke out, John McLeod, Charles ran